Hello and welcome to EPG Patashala. I am Srinivas Padigar, former professor and chairman of the Department of Ancient Indian History and Epigraphy at the Karnataka University, Dharwad. We are discussing in this particular session the paper on art and architecture of India, and within that, the module dealing with architecture and art of the Chalukyas of Kalyana. Architecture and art of the Kalyanas is a very significant topic because large, great amount of material is available for discussion in this period. In this module, we will be trying to understand the background of Kalyana Chalukya temple architecture, the rock medium that has been made use of for building temples, the variety of plans used for building the temples, then the various temple forms and their components with examples, and lastly the features of sculptural art. The Chalukyas of Kalyana were the successors of Rashtrakutas to the Deccan political hegemony. They defeated the Rashtrakutas around 973 and came to power with Kalyana in the Bidar district of Karnataka as their capital. Their authority covered a large area of the Deccan, which comprised Maharashtra, Andhra, and Karnataka. Their rule extended from 973 to 1200 AD. After initial frictions with the Cholas of Tanjavur, their country enjoyed peaceful reigns. Important rulers that ruled in this dynasty were Taila II, the founder of the kingdom, followed by Jayasimha II, Someshwara I, Vikramaditya VI, and Someshwara III. Vikramaditya VI had the longest reign of over 50 years from 1076 to 1126 AD. Number of well-established feudatory dynasties are found reigning in different parts of the Chalukya Empire during this period. They included Yadavas of Devagiri, Shilahara families of Maharashtra, Kadambas of Goa and Hanagal, Sindhas of Yelaburgi, Hoysalas of Halebid, etc. They contributed to regional variations and preferences in the architecture. We have two maps in front of you. The first map actually shows the interface zone that existed during the Chalukyas of Badami. We had Nagara in the upper part, Dravida in the lower part, and the interface of these is seen in between in the Malaprabha Valley in particular. During the period of the Chalukyas of Kalyana, you will notice a change. The interface zone has expanded. It has expanded from the Malaprabha Valley up to the southern tip of what is Karnataka or up to the river Kaveri. That is why you will find large number of temples which are built sometimes in independent styles and sometimes in mixed idioms. In this particular map, we are showing the various feudatory dynasties that were ruling and the regions which were ruled over by them. They included Kalyana Chalukyas, who are in the core region, and the region comprised of the upper parts of Karnataka, comprising of Gulbarga, Bidar, and Latur districts. Then there were Yadavas of Devagiri in Maharashtra, with Devagiri or Daulatabad as the capital. Then Shilaharas were there in western part of Maharashtra. Then Rattas were there in the southern part of Maharashtra and partly in northern part of Karnataka. Then Kadambas of Goa were there, ruling over principally Goa region and parts of western Karnataka. Then the region called Bedavalnadu, which was an administrative division, was located in the central part of Karnataka. Then we have Hanagal Kadambas, who ruled from Hangal in the Haveri district of Karnataka. Then Sindhas of Kurugodu were there. And lastly, the Hoysalas were there, having authority over a large area south of the Tungabhadra river. One of the important aspects of the study of architecture of this period is the appearance of standard architectural manuals. The experience of the architects was consolidated in the form of architectural texts. So we have separate southern texts for this period, which are represented by Manasara, Mayamata, etc. We have separate northern texts, which are represented by works like Vishwakarma Shilpa, Samarangana Sutradhara, Aparajita Pricha, etc. Then we have a separate class of literature called Agamas, which are sectarian canons. They also contain information regarding the architecture of the period. Then we must observe that the northern texts are particularly useful for studying the Kalyana Chalukya architecture. The architects of the Kalyana Chalukya period used diverse rock media for constructions. Their choice depended upon the availability of the material, and therefore where basalt was available, they made use of basalt for constructions, particularly in Maharashtra region. Then they have used sandstone in the upper parts of Karnataka, particularly in Bagalkot region. Then they have extensively used soapstone in different regions of Karnataka, particularly in southern part of Karnataka. The use of the soapstone resulted in delicate decoration and figural sculpture of the monuments. Now let us have a look at the general features of the temples of the period. The first feature is the availability of diverse plans. There is a standard plan which has been made use of for large number of temples. They consist of sanctum, vestibule, walled hall, and porch. There is no inner walled ambulatory, which was extensively noticed during the early Chalukya period. Variations in plans are noticed as follows. There is an additional open hall, then walled halls with openings on east and south side are also sometimes found. The temples with walled ambulatory are extremely rare during this period. In fact, we have only one example of that in the Chandramoulishwara temple at Unakal. The exterior contour of the Mula Prasada or the shrine proper may be square based with central and corner offsets, or it may be stellate with variations in detail. There were single shrined or Ekakuta temples, double shrined or Dvikuta temples, and triple shrined or Trikuta temples. You can see in this picture the various plans of the temples found in respect of the temples of the Chalukyas of Kalyana. The upper ones represent single sanctum temples and the lower ones the triple sancta plans. This is the Lakundi Kashi Vishweshwara temple, which represents Tvikuta or double sancta plan. We have very rarely multiple sancta plan also, as in the case of Ujjaini Murulasiddheshwara. Very rarely there are temples with internal ambulatory, such as the Unakal Chandramoulishwara temple. Then again, there are star-shaped temples or stellate temples, in which mostly the 16-point star has been made use of. You have the example of Rameshwara temple at Kalagi in Gulbarga district. Let us now consider the temple forms which were made use of by the architects of the period. There are four basic temple forms. The first one is Dravida, which we describe as Karnataka Dravida because it conforms to northern Shilpa texts. It is distinct from Dravidian style temples of southern tradition found in Tamil Nadu during this very period. The term Vesara has been made use of by some scholars to describe these temples, but there are some problems in accepting that terminology. The second temple form, which is very important, is the Famsana temple. We call this Karnataka Famsana because it has distinguishing features from those which are found elsewhere in India. The third one is the Nagara or North Indian temple form, comprising a large variety of subforms. And lastly, we have the Bhumija, which is a new form that emerged first in the Malabar region, and it is found constructed also in Karnataka at many places during the later Chalukya period. Now we will go into some details of the various temple forms. First, we will consider the Karnataka Dravida tradition. The Karnataka Dravida tradition temples are either small sized ones or medium sized ones. The small temples have Shukanasa, central double offset on walls, Dravida turrets on walls, and staggered shala. Medium sized temples have heavy pillar relief between the central offset and the corner offset, and a similar pillar may also be found on the Antarada exterior. Some temples of Karnataka Dravida tradition are in mixed idiom. That is, Dravida, Nagara, and Bhumija turrets are found on the walls or over wall niches and on the shikhara. The slide in front of you presents the two temples built in Dravida tradition, one during the early Chalukya period and the second during the later Chalukya period. You can see the physical differences very clearly in this. In this picture, we demarcate the various components of Karnataka Dravida temple. It has three principal components. One is the pitha or the pedestal. The second is the jangha or the wall. The third is the shikhara or the superstructure. The fourth is the crowning parts comprising of ghanta and kalasha. There are some secondary components also noticed. The pitha, for example, has a kuraka, padma, kumuda, and kapota moldings. Above that, Makarapattika and Vedi are found. The Jangha wall has the thin pilasters or kudyasthambas in addition to sculptures. There is a chadya terminating the wall. Over that you have kapota and the hara comprising of kuta and shala edicules. This is repeated in the upper stories. And lastly, we have a bell-like component called ghanta. This is crowned by kalasha. The picture in front of you shows one of the early temples built in Karnataka Dravida tradition during the time of the Chalukyas of Kalyana. This is known as the Brahmajinalaya at Lakkundi. It is a Jaina temple built around 1006 AD. You can see the features which we have demarcated earlier on a Dravida type temples of the later Chalukyas in an earlier slide. The same temple also gives an idea of what a staggered shala means. This component actually appears as a part of the hara or garland over the wall. And in this, we notice that the shala is represented in such a way that number of shalas are emerging from the principal central shala. In this slide, you are seeing the various parts of the hara portion. You can see the Vedi, you can see the Kutam, you can see the Nasi of the Shala, you can see the Shakti Dvaja or the Kirti Mukha. Then you have the Shala also demarcated along with a Kapota. This is the photograph of Lakkundi Kashi Vishveshwara temple built in latter half of the 11th century. This is actually Karnataka Dravida temple form built in mixed idiom because you find the turrets, particularly of the Nagara tradition, represented on the walls and over the Devakoshtas or niches. This is the Kuruvatti Mallikarjuna temple, also built in Karnataka Dravida mixed idiom during the latter half of the 11th century. Its superstructure has been rebuilt later. This is the famous Itigi Mahadeva temple built in 1113 AD. It is again a representative of Karnataka Dravida idiom. You can clearly see here the introduction of a heavy pillar between central and corner offsets. Karnataka Dravida temples are sometimes built in mixed idiom. For example, the Shiva temple at Tamdi Surla in Goa gives an instance where the wall details are treated as in the Vamsana temple form. They are plain with a band at the center. On the other hand, the superstructure is built like the Dravida temples with hara and stories having edicules of Kuta, Shala, etc. A similar temple can be seen in Balambid. It is also in the mixed idiom. The wall treatment is like Vamsana Jangha manner. Pitha is more like Dravida. The superstructure is in Dravida tradition. The later Chalukya architects also experimented with stellate plans. One of the most famous temples built on a stellate plan is found in Dambal in Gadag district of Karnataka. This temple is called Doddabasappa temple. It is dated around 1125. The importance of this temple is that it has 24 cornered plan. Normally we have 8 or 16 cornered plans for stellate temples, but this one is an exception in having 24 corners. It has also 7 stories above, thus conforming to the textual description of Kailasa temples. Now we shall discuss about Karnataka Vamsana temple form. Here are 2 examples, one from the early Chalukya period and the second from the later Chalukya period. You can make out the difference between the two. Karnataka Vamsana temple form is so called because the temples of Vamsana order which were built in Karnataka during the later Chalukya period have certain distinct features. Transformation into distinct form is particularly seen in the fact that the Amalaka of the earlier period is replaced by a ghanta or a bell-like component. The walls are plain with a central offset. There is a simple pedestal and the superstructure is tiered. And the superstructure is crowned by a ghanta and kalasha. On the wall, sometimes a band is found, very rarely decorated. There are also temples built in mixed idiom. Dravida Pitha, Kudyasthambas, framing wall offsets are some of the features which are seen in the Karnataka Vamsana form temples of mixed idiom. Here you see the parts of the Vamsana temple demarcated. The temple is on the Hemakuta hill at Hampi and belongs to about 13th century. This temple from Lakshmeshwar called Anantanatha Vasadi represents a Vamsana temple, all right, but it is in the mixed idiom. It dates from 12th century. What is noteworthy about this temple is whereas the Pitha or the pedestal is of Dravida order, the wall is also of the Dravida order in the sense that there are Kudyasthambas which frame the offsets. But the superstructure is in the Vamsana order. Now we come to the Nagara temple form. Here are 2 examples, one from the early Chalukya period, then the second from the later Chalukya period. You can notice the differences between the two by comparing the temples. The Rekha Nagara of early Chalukya period, during this period develops into several sub-varieties. There are temples with single spire, which are called Latina in the texts. Then there are temples with multiple spires, which are classed as Shekhari. Then the temples have plain walls or sometimes pillared walls, and rarely with sculpture also. The plan of the temple exterior will be of Pancharatha type. Some temples built in Nagara style are in mixed idiom. They incorporate the Dravidian features of Kudyastambhas on the walls. This is an example of Latina temple from a place known as Hattargi. The temple is called Shikareshwara temple and it hails from Belgaum district. You can see the simplicity of the spire. You see only single spire in this case, that is why we call it Latina. This is another example of Latina, also called Ekandaka, that is single spired. This is the Parvati temple at Umapur. This is the upper part of the Mahadeva temple at Umapur in Bidar district. Now this photograph shows a temple known as Siddheshwara temple at Shirur in Bagalkot district. We can describe this as Nagarachanda temple in the sense that it has Nagara or North Indian features. It looks like a Latina temple, but there are some complications introduced. But what is noteworthy about this temple is the incorporation of Kudyastambhas on the walls, which is a Dravida feature. The temple dates from 11th century. Now this example is from Kalagi in Gulbarga district. It is called Jalakanteshwara temple and dates from about 12th century. The interesting part of this temple is that it is stellate planned, but the way in which the Adhisthana or Pitha, as also the wall, are formulated is interesting because it represents the Nagara tradition. So we have temples built on stellate plan with 16 points in Nagara tradition also. Let us now consider the Shekhari temple form. The Shekhari temple form emerges as shown in this picture by bringing together multiple temples of Nagara order. In the center you have a Latina temple and at four corners you can see the Latina temples repeated. Now if these 5 Latina temples are mixed in the way shown above, then they will be forming a Shekhari temple. Such temples are found in large numbers in northern India during this period. In Karnataka, very few instances are seen. For example, on the Anantanatha Basadi at Lakshmeshwar, you have this simple representation of a Shikhara model of the Shekhari temple. Since it has only 5 spires, it is called Kesari subtype within the Shekhari class. You can see another Shekhari model. Nagarachanda is a larger class, within that Shekhari also comes. Now this is a full-fledged temple you can see in Karnataka. It comes from Hangal and is named Ganesha temple. It represents the Shekhari Prasada incomplete. It's a 12th century temple. You can see multiple spires forming the Shikhara of this temple. There are as many as 25 of them, big and small. This is a representation of a Shekhari temple on the wall of the Tarakeshwara temple at Hanakal. It dates from 12th century, but it shows how the architects of the period in the later Chalukya reign were well acquainted with the various sub-varieties of Shekhari temple form, having different number of the spires. Now we come to the Bhumija temple form. Bhumija temple form is distinguished in the texts like Samarangana Sutradhara and Aparajita Pracha. It is supposed to have originated in Malava region and later on spread to other regions like the Deccan. The superstructure is a very important characteristic of the Bhumija temple form. It comprises of horizontally arranged Nagarakutas, one above the other, like stories. The number of stories may vary up to 9. In the Chalukya region, most Bhumija temples have lost their superstructure. This slide shows you an example from Maharashtra, which also belongs to the later Chalukya period. It comes from Sakegaon. It shows the details of a Bhumija superstructure. The important thing to notice here is the arrangement of the story, which comprises of Nagara Kutas placed on a pilaster. These are placed side by side so that they form a garland called Malika. Now, this is how a Karnataka Bhumija Prasada looks like. The picture on the left side is actually an old photograph of the Chanakeshwara temple at Belur. The picture on the right shows how a Bhumija superstructure is formed with Malika of Nagara Shikara models on pilasters. As I told you earlier, most of the later Chalukya Bhumija temples have lost their superstructure. We present before you this one example from Kidrapur, where the superstructure has been reconstructed later on, but not in Bhumija order. But the original temple was of Bhumija order. This is the Kopeshwara temple at Kidrapur, dating from 12th century. It is a 24-cornered stellate Bhumija temple. Let us now consider some other features of later Chalukya temples. These features include well-decorated door frames, varieties of pillars which are well decorated, varieties of ceilings. Superstructure on halls are rare, but they are of Samvarna type when they are present. You can see here a picture of the door frame of the Kashi Vishveshwara temple at Lakundi, dating from 11th century. This consists of maximum number of shakas or bands, namely 9. This is the maximum prescribed in the texts. Similarly, on the interior, in the interior of the temples, you will notice varieties of pillars. This example is from Tarakeshwara temple at Hanagal. You can see varieties of pillars, some circular, some octagonal, some 12-sided, some 16-sided, some fluted, and so on and so forth. Some of these pillars are lathe turned. Likewise, we have the ceilings also decorated in various manners. Ceilings called vitana are sometimes very plain and flat, sometimes very well decorated, like this one in the Tarakeshwara temple at Hanagal. As mentioned earlier, we have sometimes over the hall the superstructure. This is the case of Kamala Basadi in Belgaum, and the temple was built by Rattas of Saundatti in 13th century. The roof type, though it resembles the Famsana order, is called Samvarna type of roof. This is found on the mandapas of this period very rarely. Let us now come to the sculptural art of the period. The sculptural art of the period has figural sculpture on walls, but they are very rare, and the sculptures are very small sized. The themes that you find on the walls are forms of Vishnu, forms of Shiva, forms of Devi, Ganesha, Dikpalakas, Saptamatrikas, narratives, etc. Similarly, we have images installed in the hall, and they represent different deities which are mentioned above. These sculptures are very well decorated, particularly in the part called Prabhavali. The bracket figures were originally there in many of the later Chalukya temples, but they are now missing from most temples. Some best examples are seen in the Mallikarjuna temple at Kurvatti. Here are some illustrations of the sculptures of the later Chalukya period. These two sculptures represent Ravana, the first one lifting Kailasa mountain, the second one Ravana fighting with Airavata. These are found on the wall of the Kashi Vishweshwara temple at Lakkundi. The two sculptures seen here are from Galageshwara temple at Galaganatha in Haveri district. The first one is the representation of Vishnu, the second one that of Saraswati. Particularly note the way in which the background of the images is decorated. These two examples are again from Lakkundi. The first one represents Lakshmi Narayana, the second one Durga Bhagavati. They are of 12th century and assignable to Kalyana Chalukya period. Again, you have to notice, apart from the way in which the deities are represented, the way in which they are decorated, the Prabhavali part is more or less similar in most of the independent sculptures of the later Chalukya period. This is an example of a bracket figure found on the Mallikarjuna temple at Kurvatti. Such figures of ladies are called Salabanjikas. The Hoysala temples are actually famous for Salabanjika figures, number of them being found on the Belur Chanakeshava temple. Let us summarize our study. The temples of the later Chalukyas are found over a large area of the Deccan, comprising of Maharashtra, Karnataka and Andhra. They are built of basalt or sandstone or soapstone. The plans are of variety. There may be single sanctum, there may be double sancta, there may be triple sancta or multiple sancta. The exteriors are based on square or 16-point or 24-point star. The temple forms are 4 in number, namely Dravida, Vamsana, Nagara and Bhumija. Other features include door frames, varieties of pillars and ceilings. The sculptures include architectural ornamentation, less figural sculpture on temple walls, diminutive reliefs on pillar bases, etc. For details of the subject matter discussed in this module, you may go through the e-text provided to you, as also the references provided at the end.